Hey, welcome back to Common Mansplaining. I'm Eddie. Got another juicy one for you. JD Vance had an interview, goes head to head with Margaret Brennan over at Face the Nation, CBS. So I want to react to it in real time. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Pete Hegseth, it was a tie, bipartisan opposition, smallest margin since the job was created. You had to break that tie. If the nominee can't unite your party, how's he going to lead 3 million people?
Well, look, I think Pete is a disruptor, and a lot of people don't like that disruption. But Margaret, that disruption is incredibly necessary. If you think about all of those bipartisan massive votes, we have to ask ourselves, what did they get us? They got us a country where we fought many wars over the last 40 years, but haven't won a war about as long as I've been alive. They've got us a military with a major recruitment crisis, a procurement price crisis that's totally dysfunctional, where we buy airplanes for billions and billions of dollars, terrible cost overruns, the delivery dates are always delayed. So we need a big change. Now, admittedly, there are people who don't like that big change, but it is necessary, and it's explicitly what Donald J. Trump ran on. And I think part of the reason why the American people elected him their 47th president.
Kidding. Not only that, Pete Hegseth, I hope, will bring back the sanctity of standards, military standards, to the armed forces. There's a lot of things that in the new wave of warfare that Pete Hegseth is going to have to stay abreast of. But ultimately, I thought he was a great candidate choice. I think, all the attacks on him are just, anti-establishment, right? It's going to be one of those things where he's an anti-establishment figure, just like Trump. He's a disruptor. And so anybody who is part of the old guard, right, is just going to be opposed to that because they know they're about to get dethroned.
So the main objective is changing all of that, that it's going to be Pete Hegseth alone?
I'd say the main problem the main thing that we want Pete Hegseth to do is to fix the problems at the Department of Defense. And unfortunately, there are many. We've gotten into way too many wars that we don't have a plan for winning. We've gotten into way too many misadventures that we shouldn't have got into in the very first place.
Yeah, I can tell you. So having known, my grandfather fought, in the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and I've known many people to say this about America and our interventionism. When you don't have a solid objective, then you can't win, right? If you don't have something you're aiming for in an engagement, then you can't get there, right? And so the biggest problem I see with our interventionism worldwide is we have all these conflicts that we get involved in, like Ukraine and Israel, and then at the end of the day, they don't actually do anything for us as American people. They often don't even do anything for our allies. So it's like, what are we doing?
Place. And our procurement process, Margaret, is incredibly broken. We're
Those
in an
are policy
era.
Decisions.
Well, of course, they're policy decisions, but they're also logistical and implementation decisions.
Yeah, it's mostly logistics. I'm sorry, that's management.
Look at where we are with the rise of artificial intelligence, with the rise of drone technology and drone warfare. We have to really, top to bottom, change the way that we fund the procurement of weapons, the way that we arm our troops. This is a major period of disruption, and we think Pete Hegseth is the guy to lead the job. Now, there's another element to this, Margaret, too, which is we believe that military morale, at least until the election of President Trump, was historically low. You had the Army missing recruitment goals by tens of thousands of soldiers, and already recruitment is starting to pick up because Pete Hegseth is fundamentally a warfighter's leader at the Department of Defense. He is a guy who sees not through the perspective of the generals or the bureaucrats. He looks at things through the perspective of the men and women that we send off to fight in our wars.
Both the Wall Street Journal and the National.
So one other thing I want to say is that our warfare structure, the theaters upon which our warfares are waged, are changing so fast that I think you need a fresh perspective. I think you need some. It's one of the other domains that's going to be huge in the upcoming century is cislunar warfare, right? Being able to control that space between the Earth and the Moon, being able to control the space above. It's always been high ground, right? Like it's always been high ground for millennia, right? Back in the day, you put a castle on a hill. Now the high ground is being above the satellites, being in the Lagrange points, taking control of the moon, taking care of the areas that are above any kind of satellite defense system that you might have.
Review, conservative publications, as you know, have been critical of Tulsi Gabbard. The Review called her an atrocious nominee who deserves to be defeated. They compared her defense of Edward Snowden, the fugitive, who stole U.S. secrets to an attorney general who thinks the mob gets a bad rap. Her refusal to accept U.S. intelligence findings that Assad gassed his own people, they said, was like a nominee for OMB director not being able to count.
Okay, first of all, terrible analogies. Second of all, Snowden, I'm very conflicted about Snowden, but I will say this. The way that they paint him is very, very negative, far more negative than the reality, right? Did he steal military secrets? Did he steal like nation secrets? Not really. What he did was expose secrets that he was rightfully exposed to himself because he was part of the intelligence mechanism, right? It's not like he went into a dark alley, climbed in through a window, found some secrets and ha ha ha, I'm going to steal these and then run off with them. No, that's not what Snowden did. Okay. And honestly, Julian Assange is kind of almost in the exact same situation. They're whistleblowers. And he exposed to the American people that the government was spying on us. That's the kind of thing I want exposed to me. That's the kind of secret I want brought to my attention. I don't know about you guys, but I want to know when people spy on me. Now, as far as Assad gassing his own people, that's an untested, unproven theory, right? Sure, the defense secretary at the time said that he thought that's what happened, but then he retracted it later, like a year later. Mattis, he retracted that statement. See, this is the problem. You remember when that pipeline got supposedly bombed by Russia, the Russian pipeline, the one that helps Russia? They bombed their own pipeline somehow. See, this is the same intelligence mechanism that presents evidence like that presents intelligence like the Steele dossier. And if you can see these kind of failures and then not at least question the framing of Assad, I would have to say that you're crazy, right? So the fact that they're claiming that she's crazy just for questioning the intelligence mechanism that has lied to us over and over and over again. They're of course they're going to do it because, right, these publications probably are CIA fronts anyway, right? They're probably MIC front publications anyway.
Does any of this give you pause putting her in charge of the U.S. intelligence community? Yes or no?
No, Margaret, look, these are publications that attacked Donald J. Trump obsessively, but those publications don't determine who the president is, the American people do.
Him.
And Donald J. Trump is the person who determines who his cabinet is, not these publications that I think, frankly, have lost relevance.
The Senate will
Tulsi
ultimately
Gabbard's,
decide.
Well, the Senate will provide advice and consent, as is its constitutional obligation, but I feel confident that Tulsi Gabbard will ultimately get through. Two things that are important to know about Tulsi. First of all, she is a career military servant who's had a classification at the highest levels for nearly 2 decades. She has impeccable character, impeccable record of service, and she also is a person who I think is going to bring some trust back to the intelligence services. The bureaucrats at our intelligence services have gotten completely out of control. They've been part of the weaponization of our political system, the weaponization of our justice system. We need to have good intelligence services who keep us safe. But part of that is restoring trust in those services, and we think Tulsi is the right person to do it. That's why the president
she doesn't trust them because they're not trustworthy, because they present false evidence, they present false intelligence all the time. It's like a shadow game to them. That's why she doesn't trust. I don't trust them. Nobody should trust them. They are untrustworthy.
She recognizes that the bureaucrats have gotten out of control, and we need somebody there who's going to rein them in and return those services to their core mission of identifying information that's going to keep us safe.
You campaigned on lowering prices for consumers. We've seen all of these executive orders. Which one lowers prices?
We have done a lot, and there have been a number of executive orders that have caused already jobs to start coming back into our country, which is a core part of lowering prices. More capital investment, more job creation in our economy is one of the things that's going to drive down prices for all consumers, but also raise wages so that people can afford to buy the things that they need. If you look at our slate of executive orders, no, Margaret, prices are going to come down, but it's going to take a little bit of time, right? The president has been president for all of 5 days. I think that in those 5 days, he's accomplished more than Joe Biden did in 4 years. It's been an incredible breakneck pace of activity. We're going to work with Congress. We're, of course, going to have more executive orders, and we're going to try, the way that you lower prices is that you encourage more capital investment into our country. And you ask specifically, what executive order is going to help lower prices? All of the stuff that we've done on energy, to explore more energy reserves, to develop more energy resources in the United States of America. One of the main drivers of increased prices under the Biden administration is that we had a massive increase in energy prices. Donald Trump has already taken multiple executive actions that are going to lower energy prices, and I do believe that means consumers are going to see lower prices at the pump and at the grocery store, but it's going to take a little bit of time. Rome wasn't built in a day, and while we've done a whole lot, we can't undo all of the damage of Joe Biden's presidency.
So, and here's what I will say. Now, I don't share his appraisal that prices will actually come down, but I do believe that they'll come down with regard to the proportion against wages, right? I don't think that the prices themselves will ever, because that's not what stores do, right? Once the stores have raised the price, it's rarely that, like if a banana goes up to 49 cents a banana, they're not going to bring it back down to 39 cents. What they will, though, is leave it there while wages catch up. And so as wages catch up, you'll have a CPI that's better, right? So it's a little bit different, but yeah.
A lot of things that contributed to higher energy prices, and there was record oil and gas production.
Yes, Joe Biden did many terrible things to lead to an increase in prices. I agree, Margaret.
No, but all the things you experience at the grocery store are what people touch and feel. That's what you were talking about, bacon on the campaign trail.
Of course.
Does she not understand how energy affects prices?
Of course.
Those things, when do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives?
Well, Margaret, how does bacon get to the grocery store? It comes on trucks that are fueled by diesel fuel. If the diesel's way too expensive, the bacon's going to become more expensive. How do we grow the bacon? Our farmers need energy to produce it. So if we lower energy prices, we are going to see lower prices for consumers, and that is what we're trying to fight for.
Well, the flurry of executive orders, most of them weren't about the economy. Many of them
were, though, Margaret. We had, I think we've taken
promise
over
of tariffs by February 1st.
We've taken over 200 executive actions, some executive orders, other executive actions. Again, this is in less than a week, and a lot of them were focused on the economy, bringing investment into our country and lowering energy prices. We've also focused on safety, restoring public safety, ending weaponization of the Department of Justice. We've done a lot. And I think the president is to be commended for actually coming in and doing something with this incredible mandate the American people gave him. He's not sitting in the Oval Office doing nothing. He's doing the American people's business.
I will give Trump this. For all of my reservations about Trump, he has come in and moved at a breakneck pace. Like, he has signed so many executive actions, most of which I like. Not all of them, but most of which I like. And God, is he moving? He's an animal. He's working like 16 hours a day, every single day. If he can keep that up for another 4 years, I'll be marveled. I'll be just flabbergasted.
Business, and I think they're going to see a lot of good effects from it.
Well, a lot of these announcements have yet to take effect.
Sure.
The president did say he wants to do something with an executive order in relation to federal emergency response. He said he may reform or eliminate FEMA. Instead of sending emergency responders, he may start to send a percentage of money to states to take care of themselves. But, FEMA has specialized expertise that some of these states just don't have.
What specialized expertise does FEMA have that a state, that contractors in a state don't have? What is she talking about?
And in their arsenal. And
I wish
how
that they...
will states who are lower income states, the Mississippis, the Kentuckys, the Alabamas, be able to do this for themselves without federal help?
Well, the president, to be clear, is not saying we're going to leave anybody behind. He's saying that in the way that we administer these resources, some of which is coming from the federal level, some of which is coming from the state level, we've got to get the bureaucrats out of the way and get the aid to the people who need it most.
But these are the first
honest, Margaret,
responders.
you talk about the expertise from FEMA. FEMA in North Carolina, in California, in Florida with some of the hurricanes has often been a disaster. And it's not because we don't have good people at FEMA, it's because bureaucratic red tape and garbage prevents the rapid deployment of resources to the people who need it most.
But the states are now going to have to do this themselves?
Oh, no. The states are going to have to do it alone. What do we do? We're all going to die. Oh, my God. Okay, this kind of catastrophizing is insane. It's insane. The states did things by themselves for years and years and years, decades and decades and decades, and it was not a problem. Why have we become so terribly reliant on the federal government to wipe our butts for us? We don't need the federal government for schools. We don't need the federal government for first response to disasters. It's nice if they help, And I think that Trump is planning on performing, so, like leaving some safety nets in place, or like giving resources where they're due. I mean, look, he responded to California. He got in office, and 3 days later, he's over in California helping out with the wildfires. I think that the federal government can do plenty to like remove the red tape to get to deregulate where it's necessary. But it really isn't the federal guys. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's all the federal government's supposed to do. That's it. They're not supposed to do all this other nonsense.
The president is trying to encourage us to reform the way that we deliver emergency response in a way that gets resources to the people who need it.
So don't take him literally, is what you're saying.
We should take
I would
the
never
president.
take Trump literally.
President at his word that FEMA needs desperate reform, because it does. Margaret, when I went to North Carolina as VP-elect, but before we were sworn in, people would talk about how FEMA would get resources, food, medicine, water, to a warehouse, but then would have no plan to get it from the warehouse to the people in the mountains who were literally starving and thirsting to death.
They literally would. I had a friend that went over and tried to deliver water and food and medical supplies, and he gave it to FEMA because FEMA intercepted it, told him that they were the ones that were going to coordinate the distribution, which makes sense, except for then he found out that it didn't actually get out for like weeks. It's like, what are we doing?
Mm-hmm.
We can do so much better, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we will.
But they work with the state and local officials.
They often don't work well enough. And again, that's not
going to be
because
on the state
of
and local officials?
the FEMA management officials don't work well enough with the state and local officials to get resources to the people who need it. We should expect, and this is, I think, one of the fundamental premises of President Trump's leadership, the American people should expect more of their government. When there's a terrible disaster, they should expect food, medicine, and water to get to the people who need it. When there's a terrible fire in California, the fire hydrants ought to actually turn on. I am sick of the American people having such low expectations for their government. They should demand more of us, because this is the greatest country in the world, and that's what Donald Trump's leadership promises to bring back.
So still count on the federal government, but watch that space. Let me ask you about another area that you campaigned on quite a lot, and there was a flurry of activity on, and that has to do with immigration.
Sure.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops this week condemned some of the executive orders signed by President Trump, specifically those allowing immigration and customs enforcement to enter churches and to enter schools. Do you personally support the idea of conducting a raid or enforcement action in a church
they're worried about their NGO funds.
service at a school?
Well, let me address this. Of course, if you have a person who is convicted of a violent crime, whether they're an illegal immigrant or a non-illegal immigrant, you have to go and get that person to protect the public safety. That's not unique to immigration. But let me just address this particular issue, Margaret, because as a practicing Catholic, I was actually heartbroken by that statement. And I think that the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops needs to actually look in the mirror a little bit and recognize that when they receive over $100 million to help resettle illegal immigrants, are they worried about humanitarian concerns, or are they actually worried about their bottom line? We are going to enforce immigration law. We're going to protect the American people. Donald Trump promised to do that. And I believe the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, if they're worried about the humanitarian costs of immigration enforcement, let them talk about the children who have been sex trafficked because of the wide open border of Joe Biden.
You personally
I as a Catholic as well, I was also disappointed to hear. But one bishop went out and made a statement saying that that immigration policies of Trump are just incompatible with Catholicism. But that's absolutely denounced at the highest level. Everybody knows that the rule of law should hold sway, right? Every single person, even liberals, acknowledge kind of like meekly that the rule of law is still a tenet of America. They just don't always apply it, right? They just kind of apply it selectively. But everybody knows that if you've got a criminal, like a violent criminal, it doesn't matter where they are. We should get rid of them. And I don't know, back in the day, we used to banish people, right? We used to exile people like that. And that's exactly what we're doing here with deportation. It's the same thing. I think that's a very good practice. I think that it's one of the few things that truly gets somebody out of the way. It doesn't put them in a jail where we have to continue paying to their cost of living for the rest of their life. We don't want to get involved in that. I don't want to get entangled with somebody for the rest of their life. I just want to get rid of them. If they're a violent criminal, they need to go away.
support them
about
going into
people
schools
like Laken
and
Riley
churches.
who were brutally murdered. I support us doing
Okay,
law enforcement.
that's a buzzword, right? Laken Riley, Laken Riley, Laken Riley. I mean, don't get me wrong. I get it. I get it. We want to get rid of violent criminals, but I think we should stop with the poster children, right? Laken Riley doesn't want to be a poster child. Like, she doesn't have the opportunity anymore, right? She doesn't get to choose whether or not to be a spokesperson for this kind of propaganda.
Enforcement against violent criminals, whether they're illegal immigrants or anybody else, in a way that keeps us safe. Let me ask this question, Margaret. Let's separate the immigration issue. If you had a violent murderer in a school, of course I want law enforcement to go and get that person.
She's like,
out.
of course. But when it's an immigrant, all of a sudden it's a problem.
What's the point of the question?
You changed the regulation this week. That's the point of the
Except
question.
for it makes sense. Even in your own words, it makes sense. It doesn't make...
Exactly.
Giving the authority to go into churches and go into schools.
We empowered law enforcement to enforce
but
the
that
law
also
everywhere
has
to protect Americans.
Effect, a chilling effect, arguably, to people to not send their kids.
Why? Why would it have a chilling effect to sending? Listen, if I have the opportunity to send my kids to school, they're going to school no matter what. But if I'm worried about any kind of like dangerous scenario, the best case scenario is that I have police that are willing to go into the zone to help protect, right? Like if a killer is going to get into a school, then a killer is going to get into a school, and there's nothing you can do to stop that. But what you can do is allow police to respond. And she's talking about not allowing them to respond. What is she talking about? But guys, remember, this is CBS, so they're going to be like essentially at odds with everything that Trump does.
I desperately hope it has a chilling effect on illegal immigrants coming into our country.
You think the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops are actively hiding
No,
criminals?
probably not.
From
I think the U.S.
law
Conference of Catholic Bishops has frankly not been a good partner in common sense immigration enforcement that the American people voted for. And I hope, again, as a devout Catholic, that they'll do better.
There are 5 legal challenges already to one of the other immigration actions, the order on birthright citizenship. A federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan, I think you'd agree, has some conservative credentials,
Sure.
paused the order to end birthright citizenship, calling it blatantly unconstitutional.
Now here, guys, this is one of the situations where I'm going to have to side with her. I have to say that the order to end birthright citizenship is unconstitutional. And my co-host Christian may be in favor of it, but I am not. I think that is a violation of the Constitution, and I think that we have a constitutional duty to everybody who is born in America. Now, that having been said, if you want to change the amendment, there's ways to go about doing it. I don't think executive orders are that way. Don't get me wrong. I realize that this will get it in front of a judge, but ultimately, I think that like litigating the understanding of the 14th Amendment isn't helpful here, because I've read that thing like 1,000 times. There's no way of getting around this. This is just 100% against the Constitution. Now, I get it that it's being abused and it games the system. Now, we should probably figure out another way to add to that amendment, or to fix the amendment, rewrite it such that it now covers that extra escape clause that people are using. Because I get it. People show up here 9 months pregnant and like drop a baby on the ground, and then it's like all of a sudden they're tethered to America. I get it. That's not what it was originally designed for. But what it originally was designed for was taking care of our citizens. Anybody who's born here is a citizen, and that should remain the case until that amendment is fixed.
How do you reconcile this challenge to the 14th Amendment to the Constitution?
So I obviously disagree with that judge, and these things, some of them
he's going to stick up for Trump because he has to, but I just have to say they're incorrect. See, this is where politics could find some common ground, right? Because you have to give some ground someplace. And I think this is the place to give it, where you're obviously at odds with the Constitution. You would think that. Like, I would expect liberals to give ground in the Second Amendment and the First Amendment when they challenge those. But, in the 10th Amendment, everybody's forgotten that one.
Litigated. That's the nature of our constitutional system. But here's the basic idea of President Trump's view on this. If you are a lawful permanent resident or a legal immigrant who plans to stay, your children, of course, should become American citizens. But let's say you're the child of an ambassador. You don't become...
But that's not part of it.
Well, that is
There's already a carve-out
an
having to do
important
with kids of
principle.
diplomats.
But we're saying that carve-out should apply to anybody who doesn't plan to stay here. If you come here on vacation and you have a baby in an American hospital, that baby doesn't become an American citizen. If you're an illegal alien and you come here temporarily, hopefully, your child does not become an illegal.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, it does. It does. As written in the Constitution, it does. Now, again, you can change the Constitution, but as written, he's wrong.
Citizen by virtue of just having been born on American soil is a very basic principle in American immigration law that if you want to become an American citizen and you've done it the right way, and the American people in their collective wisdom have welcomed you into our national community, then you become a citizen. But temporary residents, people who come in here, whether legally or illegally, and don't plan to stay, their children shouldn't become American citizens. I don't know any country that does that or why we would be different.
Well, this is a country founded by immigrants.
Every country is founded by immigrants. That's the stupid.
Well, this is a country founded by. This is a very unique country, and it was founded by some immigrants and some settlers, but just because we were founded by immigrants doesn't mean that 240 years later that we have to have the dumbest immigration policy in the world. No country says that temporary visitors, their children, will be given complete access to the benefits and blessings of American citizenship. America should actually look out for the interests of our citizens first, and that means, again, if you're here permanently and lawfully, your kid becomes an American citizen. If you're not here permanently, if you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and don't plan to be, why would we make those people's children American citizens?
Right. Now, another thing to this, too, is by making a kid a citizen and, you've got parents that aren't planning on being citizens, that's it creates the problem where you might have to divide a family. Why would we want that, right? Ultimately, I'm behind the spirit of what they're trying to do, but I think it definitely violates the Constitution.
Permanently.
I want to ask you about refugee admissions, which were just suspended by the president. That has nothing to do with the U.S. border. Refugee screening takes 18 to 24 months to go through. They are heavily vetted. Left literally at the airport.
Very simply, guys, if you have an immigration crisis, if you have an asylum crisis, a refugee crisis, everybody coming into the nation, and it's like if you have a wound, right, and you're bleeding, the first step to fixing the problem is stop the bleeding. Just stop it. Cold hard, staunch it, and then go to fix the problem. Then stitch it up. Then do whatever you got to do to make sure that the process is fixed. But I have to agree, temporarily, we should just stop everything. That's why I think a wall is a good thing as a Band-Aid, right? Like you stop it, and then you fix the asylum process.
Week were thousands of Afghans some of whom had worked with the United States government and were promised to come here. When you talked to us in August, you said, I don't think we should abandon anybody who's been properly vetted and helped us. Do you stand by that?
Well, Margaret, I don't agree that all these immigrants or all these refugees have been properly vetted. In fact, we know that there are cases of people who allegedly were properly vetted and then were literally planning terrorist attacks on our country. That happened during the campaign, if you may remember. So clearly not all of these foreign nationals.
Ohio or whatever. Yeah, see, I have to disagree with him here too, though, because the problem is you're never going to catch everyone, right? There's always going to be something that slips through the cracks, some person that's been radicalized. And this guy might have been radicalized afterwards, right? I think he might have come here and been caught up in a cell. But if you're never going to catch everything, so you might as well do the vetting, do it as good as you can. But then, if you don't catch everybody, then you have to. That's what law enforcement's for.
But there are 30,000 people in the pipeline, Afghan refugees.
But my primary concern as the vice president, Margaret, is to look after the American people. Yep. And now that we know that we have vetting problems with a lot of these refugee programs, we absolutely cannot unleash thousands of unvetted people into our country.
These people
keep cutting them off. I mean, maybe this is, I don't watch this Face the Nation very often, but is that, for those of you below, comment, let me know. Is that something that she just does all the time? Is that part of her flair or part of her style? I don't know. But anyway, by the way, guys, if you like this content, if you want to see some more, like, share, and subscribe. Help me out, man. Give me a boost.
These people are vetted.
Just like the guy who planned a terrorist attack in Oklahoma a few months ago, he was allegedly properly vetted, and many people in the media and the Democratic Party said that he was properly vetted. Clearly, he wasn't. I don't want my children to share a neighborhood with people who are not properly vetted. And because I don't want it for my kids, I'm not going to force any other American citizens' kids to do that either.
No, and that was a very particular case. It wasn't clear if he was radicalized when he got here or while he was living here.
I don't really care, Margaret. I don't want that person in my country, and I think most Americans agree with me.
2 weeks ago, you were on Fox News, and you said if you protested peacefully on January 6th and had Merrick Garland's Department of Justice treat you like a gang member, you should be pardoned. If you committed violence on that day, obviously you shouldn't be pardoned. Did you counsel the president against these blanket pardons for 1,500 people?
Well, Margaret, I noticed
including those who committed violence.
Margaret, I noticed that you cut off the thing that I said immediately after that. The full quote is that, of course, there are gray areas. And here's the nature of the gray area. Merrick Garland's Department of Justice denied constitutional protections in the prosecutions. There were double standards in how sentences were applied to the J6 protesters.
And guys, I want to say, for those of you who've watched this channel for a while, you know that I'm not happy about January 6th and what took place. And I think they should have been kneecapped the moment they broke through the first barrier. But that having been said, if you committed violence, your butt needs to stay in jail, right? If you're over there attacking police officers just to protest, then you do not deserve to be with the rest of us. Now, that having been said, he's right. This is a technical gray area where if we don't apply fairly across the board due process, and if we deny people constitutional rights, then unfortunately our system, and this is a good thing, right? Our system is set up so that better let 10 guilty people free than one innocent person go to jail, right? And that's just been a credo of ours since the dawn of time. And I think that is a good tenet to live by. And I think that this goes to that, right? These basically are political prisoners. Now, don't get me wrong. Some of them were violent offenders and did belong in jail, but because Merrick Garland botched it, because he made them such a political target, then this becomes necessary. By the way, these weren't blanket pardons. There are definitely cases that Trump did not approve from January 6th. So he didn't just approve everyone. He approved he looked at the individual cases, and there were some that did not get approved. So
versus other groups. What the president said consistently on the campaign is that he was going to look at a case-by-case basis, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at 1,600 cases, and the thing that came out of it, Margaret, is that there was a massive denial of due process of liberty.
1,600 cases they looked at, only 1,500 people got pardoned, right? So there were people that were denied.
And a lot of people were denied their constitutional rights. The president believes that. I believe that, and I think he made the right decision.
Daniel Rodriguez used an electroshock weapon against a policeman who was dragged out of the defensive line by plunging it into the officer's neck. He was imprisoned, sentenced to 12 years, 7 months. He got a pardon. Ronald Maccabee hit a cop while wearing reinforced brass knuckle gloves, and he held one down on the ground as other rioters assailed the officer for over 20 seconds, causing a concussion. If you stand with law enforcement, how can you call these people unjustly imprisoned?
Margaret, you're separating, there's an important issue here. There's what the people actually did on January the 6th, and we're not saying that everybody did everything perfectly. And then what did Merrick Garland's Department of Justice do in unjustly prosecuting well over 1,000 Americans in a way that was politically motivated?
Is violence like that against a police officer ever?
Of course not. But here's the thing. Again, if I go today and I rob a store or something like that, and I need to go to jail, but if I then get knocked to the ground, don't get read my Miranda rights, don't get the chain of custody is botched on every piece of evidence, and then, they deny my constitutional freedoms, they don't give me a phone call, they don't give me, if all that stuff goes down, then I'm sorry, I have to go free, because then I've become a political prisoner. I've become a target of the system, rather than what should happen, which Merrick Garland botched this. He messed this whole thing up.
Violence against a police officer is not justified, but that doesn't mean that you should have Merrick Garland's weaponized Department of Justice expose you to incredibly unfair process, to denial of constitutional rights, and frankly, to a double standard that was not applied to many people, including, of course, the Black Lives Matter rioters who killed over 24 people and never had the weight of a weaponized Department of Justice come against them. The pardon power is not just for people who are angels or people who are perfect. And of course, We love our law enforcement and want people to be peaceful with everybody, but especially with our good cops. That's a separate issue from what Merrick Garland's Department of Justice did. We rectified a wrong, and I stand by it.
Never mind the fact that Biden's over here giving people pardons on death row and stuff. So, like, whatever. I mean, well, not full pardons, but yeah, etc. Anyway, so that's what I got for you for today, guys. What do you think? Let me know. Please like, share, and subscribe, and put some comments below to help me out. Please let me help me get this channel off the ground, and I'll catch you next time on Common Mansplaining.